Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for a part two, almost a deep dive following our last CPSIA webinar, and that was almost 2 weeks ago now. So this webinar is specific to understanding the tracking labels related to CPSIA requirements with a step-by-step guide to compliance. This is the crucial webinar in regards to tracking labels. So we're joined again today by Steve and Carolyn from US CPSC, as well as Carlos, our specialist in compliance from HQTS. So very, very briefly, for those that missed out on our last webinar, which is more of an overview of CPSIA requirements for children's products, you can visit and rewatch that playback recording through our HQTS website, as well as our YouTube channel. We also will be restreaming that webinar along with this webinar sometime later in December and in January next year as well. I'll introduce Steve and give maybe a bit of a background. So starting with Steve, Steve Williams joined the US Consumer Product Safety Commission in December 2014 to serve as the International Program Manager. In this role, Steve works as part of a bigger team responsible for the Consumer Product Safety Commission's engagement with foreign governments and manufacturers, as well with international organizations involved in consumer product safety. So welcome, Steve.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Steve, I'll quickly share my screen and we can start with your slides.
Thank you.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great.
Can hear. Okay.
For any questions, we'll be holding a Q&A at the end of this webinar. We've also collected a list of questions previously submitted already through our message box on our website. So thank you, Steve. I'll pass you the floor.
Okay. So Anthony, if you go to slide 2, we'll begin with just the legal disclaimer that our lawyers asked us to present. So there's a lot of text here, but basically this just says that we're here as staff members of CPSC and not the commissioner level. And basically today is the start of a conversation. The expectation should be that we're kind of giving you a heads up or guiding you to some resources that after this event, you're welcome to reach out to us, go online, look at the citations we mentioned, etc., for further information about your specific product and your specific situation. Next slide, please. So the agenda today, we're going to have 2 parts. My colleague Carolyn and I will divide this up. So I'm going to start with just some very brief comments about who we are, who CPSC is. I'm going to talk about some of our common tracking and labeling requirements, specifically from CPSC's perspective, where we sometimes see missteps by companies, things that they forget to do or they're maybe not getting right. The details, though, I'm going to defer to Carlos in terms of the nitty-gritty. So we'll talk about the tracking information labels. I'm going to highlight some things on choking hazards and children's toys specifically, very important and something you'll want to make sure that you get right. And then Carolyn's going to round things out by talking about some of the specific requirements for art materials and durable infant and toddler products. And we also have a slide or 2 on batteries. Next slide. And the next one too, please. So on the overview of CPSC, sometimes people are a little bit surprised at how new we are and the size of our organization. So we're actually one of the newest federal agencies created in 1972. We're independent, so that basically means that we have the commission structure that I mentioned, and although there's certain directives and guidelines that we follow, we have independence through commissioner votes on topics and regulations and requirements. Our main mandate is to protect human health and safety from unreasonable risks of injury and death. And then the last bullet you'll see in terms of the commissioner structure, we do have 5 at any one time. We have a chair in charge of the commission. Next slide, please. There's often some confusion in terms of what we don't cover. We actually have a huge mandate. CPSC covers around 15,000 different types of consumer products. That list expands almost weekly because when you think of innovation and the internet and AI, there's all kinds of new products that are constantly coming out. But there is some large segments of products where in other countries they may be handled by the same sort of consumer agency, but we don't handle in our structure. So commonly, we don't handle food and alcohol, pesticides, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and some of the others that you see on this slide. Next slide, please. So now let's transition to the actual labeling requirements. I just want to highlight a few things that are important to keep in mind. And the first I want to talk about is just, next slide, Anthony. The overall importance of getting this right. I ran some data, for example, of the last 5 years from our port surveillance folks that involve thousands of entries, basically from countries throughout the world, worldwide trade. And labeling and tracking violations were the number 2 reason why things were held at port, why they were delayed in terms of entry. The first category was kind of a hodgepodge of a variety of miscellaneous corner cases. But number 2 is a very large bar. And it is important to pay attention to this because it can affect the timing of your entry and cause you headaches. So it's worth kind of researching to get right. The next slide. So in the November 20th webinar with HQTS, we discussed that basically the foreign manufacturer, that as a foreign manufacturer, it's really important to be aware of these requirements, even though the importers have the legal responsibility for the compliance of the product with the applicable safety requirements. So when we look at the types of things that you need to be aware of, one of the top ones I think is in terms of the second bullet, with the tracking information being permanently affixed to the children's product and its packaging, if that's possible. So on this point, to underscore, it should be on both the packaging and the product. However, if your product is of a nature where it's maybe very small or different types of units, where it doesn't lend itself to be marked or labeled in such a way, that's okay. You have a rationale for that, but it must be on the packaging. Also, Carlos will go into the detail in terms of the type of information that the tracking information for children's products would have, but you can imagine it would include such things as the manufacturer name, the data manufacturer, and some other information. It's also, I think, important to be aware that a lot of companies will use sort of a batch code on the product that can be used to identify all the required pieces of information. So you basically can have a reference code where you're looking at greater detail of the information and fulfilling the requirement. On the next slide, slide 10, this is an example of a fidget toy, what we call, a child can use this to kind of manage anxiety or just if they're a little bit nervous about something, they squeeze this and such. So these are typically like very small types of units. And so here you see an example where the tracking label has been applied in such a way and the type of information that it's given. And in this example, it has the batch code on the product and the packaging along with the firm's name. And the rest of the information can be basically drawn or pulled up using this batch code. So this fully satisfies the tracking information requirement through this type of method. On the next slide, please. I wanted to highlight the choking hazards. So choking hazard is actually a very important type of labeling to be aware of. This is one that would be very carefully looked at the port if the nature of the product is such where it would fall under the requirement to have this. So typical examples would be things with small parts, balloons, small balls, marbles, where a child could end up choking on them. The port surveillance people would be looking that it's labeled properly in terms of the warning of that. And the citation is here. Under 16 CFR, you can look at the specifics of what's required, but I'm sure Carlos also will be highlighting some things as well. One question that comes up when we work with companies is if these type of cautionary statements need to be certified, or they must be looked at by a third-party testing organization or lab. So the answer to that is no. We're not requiring that you work with a lab or a testing organization to certify that you meet the requirement. However, as a best practice, people we find may sometimes bundle this into their testing of the product itself that they give to the lab. They may ask them for some fee to also ensure to give comments on the labels fulfilling the requirements. So although the testing of the product, the scientific analysis to make sure the lead content, the lead surface paint, etc., meets the requirements is mandated that you must do that. On these labeling type of requirements, you don't need to, but you may choose to just to kind of have the extra reassurance and confidence. Next slide, please. Also wanted to highlight the toy standards. Toys, a very closely, pretty heavily regulated a set of products because of the nature of the vulnerability for children. Here we've laid out the specific reference, the requirement that you'll want to take a look at. So the latest updated version of what CPSC refers to by reference is ASTM F963-23. In the latest version, there are very specific requirements related to warning labels for choking and magnets and some other types of issues. So if you have a product that was manufactured after this date listed, April 20th, you'll need to make sure that it fully complies with these new types of labels, the content, the format, etc. That's a very important point. When the port people are looking at the implementation of the latest version, F963-23, they're going to be looking at this type of issue for you, that you're fulfilling this. And if you don't, then that's going to cause a type of delay. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, I want to transition over to my colleague Carolyn. She's going to round out the presentation.
Thank you, Steve, and hello, everyone. Art materials. Certain art materials must bear a statement of conformance. You can see examples of such statements on this slide. Art materials that pose a chronic hazard must be labeled in accordance with the cautionary labeling requirements under the Federal Hazardous Substance Act. Next slide. Labeling for durable infant or toddler products. They must be permanently marked with certain information. The information, I'll list some of those for you. So the name of the domestic manufacturer or importer of record, the contact information, which includes a U.S. address and phone number, and must be a toll-free number available also on the label. There's also required is the model name and number of the product and the date of manufacturer. All of that information must be on the label for durable infant and toddler products. And you can see this link on the slide here that will provide more information about this. Thank you. Next slide. Domestic manufacturers or importers of durable infant or toddler products must also provide consumers with a postage-paid registration form attached to the product. No matter what the durable or toddler product is, it must have this postage-paid registration form. Such firms must also provide consumers with an option to register their products electronically on their website or through email if a website is not available. The manufacturer must also maintain records of names, addresses, emails, and other contact information on consumers that register their products. As I mentioned on the previous slide, companies need to use a U.S. address, and the registration form must also have a U.S. address. Now, for foreign manufacturers or individuals located outside of the U.S., it can be a little tricky to understand how to obtain business reply mail with the U.S. Postal Service. So if you're struggling to find out how to get that going, please get in touch with us, or I'm sure maybe even Carlos can help. And our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Next slide. The registration forms. They are required to meet format and text requirements at the as the regulation on the slide, 16 CFR Part 1130.6. Information must be stated in English language and must be attached to the surface of each durable infant or toddler product. And it shall not be used for any other purpose other than to facilitate a recall or safety alert regarding that specific product. You can find out more information about product registration forms at the link on the slide here. Next slide. Pursuant to Section 2 of Reese's Law, CPSC published a separate final rule to establish warning label requirements for packaging of battery cell or coin batteries, including batteries that are packaged separately with a consumer product. This requirement will apply to products manufactured or imported after September 21st of 2024. But we've listed the main ones here. And see some of them here, there's a minimum size requirement, and there's information regarding the UL. So you can see all of this information here. These are the important ones, but there's more to locate when you go to 16 CFR Part 1263.4. Next slide. Now this is our last slide. So Steve and I thank you for the time that you provided us today to hear our presentation, and we will be open to have questions from you. So thank you for your time. This concludes our presentation.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you so much, Steve, as well. I actually didn't get a chance to introduce a bit more about Carolyn. So maybe I'll really quickly do that now just to do her some justice, the best I can. So as you can tell, Carolyn's an obvious expert in this topic and in this realm. So Carolyn is the CPSC's Southeast Asia program manager. Prior to joining the Office of International Programs, though, she actually served as the Assistant Division Director for the Regulatory Enforcement Division in the Office of Compliance and Field Operations. So Carolyn oversaw and managed the children's products and durable nursery products and flammability team at the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, a post that she held since 2009. So that's just a little bit more about Carolyn. But as you can tell, again, a wealth of knowledge along with Steve. So right now, we might move on to Carlos representing HQTS. I'll quickly unshare my screen. So Carlos, you'll have a chance to share yours. Thank you so much again, guys. Carlos, have you? Great. Before Carlos, you get into why you've shaven your beard in your photo, in your presentation. No. Before Carlos, you begin, I'll give a very quick introduction to your background as well. So Carlos is our compliance business development manager and developer at HQTS Group. He's a sales leader turned business compliance developer, helping HQTS customers to supercharge the way they navigate compliance. With an impressive track record of fortifying supply chains and experience working with major US companies, Carlos combines deep compliance expertise with proven strategies. He drives revenue growth by executing strategic sales plans, managing key accounts, and exceeding sales targets in B2B markets, delivering exceptional value and insights to every project. So Carlos, thank you so much for joining us and representing the HQTS team. I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thank you very much for having me today. Hello, everyone. So essentially, just as a little background, HQTS is a third-party quality service provider. So anything to do with any product, we can help you in any regards. I'll go into the details of what we can offer later in the presentation, but just as a little background of what exactly HQTS does. Okay, for today's agenda, it seems long, but we will go through them pretty quickly, to be honest. So what exactly is a tracking label? Why do labels matter? What info should be included, which is something that it's really important. Which products need tracking labels? The tracking label requirements, any combinations or problems that arise from tracking labels. And I did a special rules for crib, so this is an example that we used. So let's get started. So why do tracking labels matter? So it's really important to have tracking labels on all children's products because apart from complying with safety regulations, you can avoid any penalties or fines, or you can just avoid having your products stuck in customs entering the country. You also build trust with your customers by showing how you're trying to care for their safety by having these labels with all the right precautions for each of them. And if there are any issues for any product, which hopefully they're not, but it can happen, it's really important to have the tracking labels on it so you can track down the batch number. This is something that I believe Steve talked about previously, and I will go into the details on the batch numbers. But in general, they protect your business and your customers at the end of the day, and it's really important to have them. And it's really easy and quite inexpensive. So what information goes on a tracking label? As a general overview, the manufacturer or importer information. So essentially your company's name, so that anyone that grabs that particular product can see what the source is or who made that product. The location where the product was manufactured. So the city and country and state as well, if it can be included. Of course, you need to have the production date, so the month and year, and the batch number, which is really, really important. So this is to identify specific groups of the product. If there were any defects on the production that the company later saw and needs to make a recall or needs to inform the customers, they can do this. And that's why it's really important for specific products, which come with the registration form that Carolyn mentioned. So when you register a product, you're attaching your contact information to that specific batch. So if anything happens, the company will get in touch with you directly, apart from making a general notice. So if batch number 68, let's say, has a defect, but you didn't register your product, you'll have to see that somewhere or get that information from another source, instead of receiving an email or a phone call directly from the manufacturer telling you that there's a recall or a defect with that specific batch number. So it's really important that you register your products. Okay, so which products need tracking labels? So these are products that fall under the CPSIA. All the products made for children 12 and below need to have tracking labels. So the general categories would be toys, jewelry for kids, art supplies, books, and kids furniture. So CPSIA defines children's products based on 4 factors, which is pretty clear-cut. So if the label description says this is for kids, it must have a label. So if the manufacturer, this is a children's toy, you must have a label. If the product is promoted something that a child can use, so how the marketing works, it must have a label as well. What people recognize as a children's toy, or if something that can be used by a child, even though it could be meant for an adult, but a child can also use it. it must have a tracking label as well. And who uses it? If kids commonly use this type of product, even if it wasn't designed for them, it must have a tracking label. So it's pretty straightforward. The kinds of product that must need tracking labels for children. So the requirements for the tracking labels. So the tracking labels must be permanent, meaning they can't wear off or fade. So we can go through several different tests to test the tracking label if it fades off or wears off. They need to be visible and easy to read, pretty straightforward. And if your product is in a clear packaging, so if it has a clear plastic and you can see the product itself, it generally doesn't have to have the tracking label in the outside package, but it must have the tracking label visible through the clear package. Or you can also add the tracking label outside the clear package from inside the product. So the tracking labels must be shown in the package, or if a customer grabs any product, they must clearly see the tracking label somewhere. Okay, some issues that can arise from the labels. Well, to be honest, it could be tricky to add a label directly to a product, maybe because of the size or how it's shaped. So smaller products might not have enough space for the labels, or they could be fragile materials that could get damaged, or reusable package might serve the label instead. So you can put the tracking label outside in this case, but you have to be aware of the nature of the product, and it must be approved. So there are some regulations and stipulations to what type of products can have the tracking label on them, but must be on the package itself. So yeah, in this case, at the end of the day, there has to be a tracking label somewhere, either on the product or on the packaging. So in this case, I have an example, which is a crib. So if you're making a toddler bed, the tracking label must also include a safety information. So your labels need to be extra durable and clear, and it must be stamped, painted, or attached to the crib securely. So in this case, the durability of the paper labels, so the paper warning labels must stay in place and must be readable after being tested, of course. So you need to test these tracking labels, so you know that at the end of the day they can withstand time and wear. So there can be non-paper labels. So this could be not to create small loose parts that could pose choking hazards. There can be seam attached labels. So warning labels sewn into the seams that can and will be attached and must be intact during testing as well. Directly printed label warnings. So this could be applied directly to the crib. It could use several methods such as hot stamping, heat transfer, printing, wood burning. There can be several methods that can be used, but at the end of the day, they must be permanent and durable and withstand testing. And the tracking labels can also be on the storage pouch or other parts. So if they're printed on a kid's storage pouch or similar parts, they must be permanent and not removable. Again, you can do some testing with the product along with the tracking labels to see if they can withstand tear and wear. Okay, so what can HQTS and me and the team do to help you out? So as I mentioned before, HQTS serves as a quality service third party. So we can have supplier audits. Essentially, we ensure that your suppliers are who they say they are. We can check the legal operation, factory ownership, business location. We can also do audits on a much more intricate scale. We can have really advanced checklists. We can have engineers on site for these types of audits. They can take between 2 to 4 days. What we can also do is sample verification. So our quality assurance team collects and verifies samples directly from the factory. So what this happens is normally if you want a sample sent for testing, what some manufacturers do, they send the best samples out of the batch. What we do is we come in and we can grab a random sample from the batch, maybe not the best one, but either not the worst one, but just the random samples. So it's a random unbiased sample selection, which can also help you out. We can do product and quality inspections. So we can do pre-production inspections. This would be inspections of the raw materials, how they are managed, how they're stored, what they're being used beforehand, if they're recycled or not. We can also do during production inspections. So during the manufacturing process, we can have one of our inspectors see how the process is done, if it's meeting that quality standards during a specific part of the process of the manufacturing. And the most common is the pre-shipment inspection, which essentially is everything, like all the products are done, are ready to be shipped. So we send our inspectors to confirm the quality, the quantity, and any other special requirements that the client wants the inspector to check. We can also do that. All of these inspections can be full, essentially piece by piece, or we can have a sample inspected. We also do container loading and unloading supervisions. So if it's several products that require a sensible loading, we can have our inspector just to confirm that they're secured inside the container. We put our HQTS stamp on the container and lock. So when you come and open it, you see it hasn't been moved around or cut. We also do children's product compliance. So we can help with children's product certificates and label compliance. We have our own in-house labs for testing for toys and children's products as well. And we can help you, guide you through the international regulations and standards for not just kids products, but any type of products. And we also do testing. So we do ROS, REACH, CPSIA testing, as well as ISTA, which is packaging testing, and many other types of testing. So we can help you with certification testing, components. We can also do periodic testing and materials change, retesting. So if your manufacturer is changing a certain type of plastic, we can do the testing for that specific material change. So as you can see, HQTS covers pretty much everything to do with the product and its quality assurance. So anyways, if you have any questions or anything, please reach out. It doesn't have to be specific with children's products. It can be with anything. Me and the team will be more than happy to help you out. Thank you very much. I'll leave it to you, Anthony.
Thank you very, very much, Carlos. That was super, super informative. And thank you so much for breaking down the HQTS solutions. I think that was very, very helpful, and that might actually help answer a lot of our questions that we may already have received. So very quickly, again, guys, you can always reach out to Carlos and the team, as well as Carolyn and Stephen through our email address, which I'll also drop into our emails when we do send out our email campaigns to all the registrants that's registered for this webinar as well. So any follow-ups, feel free to reach out. Now we'll move into our Q&A. So very quickly, for our Q&A, we've received 7 questions in our message box. And if you are watching us via our online stream live, unfortunately, we cannot receive or we cannot view your comments through our live stream outside of Zoom for now. So if you do have any questions, feel free to email them through as well, and we can organize maybe for some online answers or text answers back to you guys. So we'll start off with question 1. Question 1 that we've received from our registrants is, what can I do if my product tracking labels don't comply, but only found out after arriving to the US?
Sorry about that. Hi, I can handle that question. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So in general, whenever you are aware of a possible violation of a CPSC requirement, you should contact us. Contact us immediately. But if the product is at the port and has not been distributed into commerce, into U.S. commerce, the agency could possibly give you an opportunity to correct the product at the port It really depends on whether this is your first violation and if you had been notified of previous violations of other products in the past. So it really depends. So, contact us as soon as you can when you're aware of the possible violation. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. That
You're
makes perfect. So if you ever are suspicious or if you are ever flagged with your product tracking labels may not comply, do reach out as soon as possible. Yeah.
Yes.
For question 2, this is specific to drop shipping. So for drop shipped products from overseas, what ways can I check if products comply with US tracking label standards? So I assume for the person asking this question, they don't have anyone on site that might be able to check for them, or they don't have that organized. They're just ordering something from overseas and having that drop shipped into the US ready to be sold.
Yeah, that's a tough one because it doesn't matter for us whether they're drop shipped or not. They definitely need to meet the requirements. I guess whoever they're ordering the products from, it's important to find out from whoever it is, the distributor or importer, whether they are aware of CPSC requirements and ensure that they are complying with the requirements for children's products, since children's products are the ones that require the tracking label, and to make sure that they understand our regulations and that they are meeting them before they're buying those products, because we expect the products to be in compliance. Now, again, we could also give that company an opportunity to correct the product if applicable, because as we said earlier, and as Carlos mentioned, the tracking label needs to be permanent.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So there's to be sure, that doesn't sound like there's any exemptions or for drop shipping products specifically. So as soon as you find out, do contact the right authorities. Call maybe Carolyn's mobile line. No, I'm kidding. But definitely reach out to CPSC and they should be able to go in the right direction. Yeah.
Yes.
Point 3 or question 3. Are there any specific US port inspection requirements related to tracking labels? What type of checks?
So yes, well, CPSC has compliance investigators throughout various ports around the country that inspect products in our jurisdiction, just to make sure that they're safe before they reach US commerce. Customs also have their own regulations, and they're checking products as well to make sure they are in compliance. But specifically for children's products, investigators will open the containers. They will look to see if there are permanent tracking labels on the product and its packaging. If the product is not applicable or practical to put, a permanent tracking label on the product, they will check to make sure it's practical to do it on its packaging or hang tag. I mean, there's a lot of things that they're looking for to inspect these products to make sure they are in compliance.
Fantastic. That actually answers that question so well roundedly. I don't know if there was any follow-ups that I might be able to use in there. So thank you so much, Carolyn. Very comprehensive answer. So number 4 here, we're halfway through. Is there documentation that should be requested from manufacturers or importers to confirm compliance with CPSC tracking label requirements?
That's a good question, because there's no specific documentation that manufacturers or importers are required to provide for tracking labels. Okay, specifically tracking labels. However, when children's products do not meet tracking labels or anything else, it is not uncommon for CPSC staff to request that a manufacturer or importer provide a child product certificate, which is a documentation, just to see if the children's product was tested to the appropriate performance requirements. So even though there's not a required document for the tracking, it does give a red flag to make them, request for that documentation to see if the product was tested properly and certified by a third-party accredited testing laboratory.
just jump in and underscore something that Carlos mentioned earlier in terms of the batch number. I think that's a really important aspect. I mean, from CPSC perspective, we encounter this basically every couple weeks where questions arise of if there is a recall product or a problem with certain shipments, how large is the scope of the problem? And if you've done the right data collection and maintenance, the record keeping, it can really minimize the headaches or problems that you may have, because you may be able to say this batch was, 3 weeks of production at this facility versus 5 months of production with thousands more of units that you have to track down and collect and manage in the recall process. So I think that was an excellent point that Carlos brought up, and I would just underscore the importance of paying attention to that, because it really can affect the scope quite a bit, whether you have a small problem, a very targeted solution, or a much larger problem.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Steve. And I guess thank you, Carlos, for making that making that point earlier. So extended thanks. So question 5 here. What are the penalties for retailers selling non-compliant products lacking proper tracking labels? So this question is specific to penalties for retailers selling non-compliant products.
Well, I guess I can take that too, Steve. We really like to let our attorneys leave those kind of questions to our attorneys. But I will say it is the responsibility of the domestic manufacturer for products manufactured domestically, or the importer of record for products manufactured overseas, to ensure compliance with the track and label requirements.
Understood. If we were to use, I know maybe I'm putting you in a difficult position since you're not the legal component, Carolyn. But just to paint this as a picture, if we were to imagine a retailer selling maybe, say, infant clothing, and they're maybe like a brick and mortar shop in a small town, and without knowing, they've now stocked maybe 100 pieces of maybe a certain t-shirt for toddlers that doesn't have the correct tracking labels. And if that was to be found, do they face any repercussions at all as a retailer?
Well, we do hold everyone responsible: the manufacturer, the importer, domestic distributor, as well as the retailer. But we do need to ascertain how much the retailer was aware of as well. So, but we do hold all parties responsible. They all have an action, as we would refer to, that we would have them take to address the potential violation or the violation.
Right. No, thank you so much, Carolyn. Great answer.
Yes.
So the next question here is specific to HQTS. So Carlos, this one's for you and your wonderful beard. Do HQTS fix non-compliant tracking labels to make sure my products comply?
Yeah, so we can definitely help you out. There will be an issue if the labels are already printed and on the products. That's going to be an issue because you will have to recall those products and have the correct tracking labels. What HQTS can do in this case is to verify the tracking labels. We can create the tracking labels for you as well. But if it's already done and printed out, unfortunately, you will have to recall the products and add the new tracking labels and make sure that the new tracking labels are fit to withstand wear and time. So it's really important that you go through some testing of your products to see if the tracking labels do withstand wear and time. But we can definitely help you out.
Yeah, great. Just to add on to that, this question sounds like it's a remedy after the fact. They found out the tracking labels are non-compliant. In that case, exactly like what Carlos has said, HQTS, we can help you with the corrective component in getting you the correct complying. Sorry, I'm eating my own words now. corrected compliance tracking labels. If you do get HQTS or any other accredited third-party service provider involved soon enough, that testing and checking component can also be taken care of to make sure that the non-compliant issue doesn't occur. Last and final question. This is almost another version of the last question. It asks, what can I do if my product tracking labels don't comply, but only found out after arriving to the US? I think this was already answered in the very first question, where Carolyn has already mentioned for you to contact CPSC as soon as possible in order to find the right ways or right methods to proceed. There's really nothing much more you could do at that point besides getting in touch with the correct authorities to help you with that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that concludes our Q&A that we've received online. So without further ado, is there anything else that maybe Steve, Carolyn, and Carlos, you want to add before we conclude today's webinar?
I would just like to add, please double check the tracking labels. It may sound like, oh, just add a tracking label or make the intern do this job or whatever. Please don't do that. It's really important, and you could lose a lot of money in the long term by not having a correct tracking label. And I don't know, I would like to ask Steve and Carolyn, do you test if the tracking labels do wear off, or are there any specific tests that you do for tracking labels just to make sure that they don't like tear off really quickly or anything of that sort? Just, yeah.
So I can answer that. So we don't have a specific test requirement to test for tracking labels, but we do screen products at the port just to make sure. There's a screening method we use to make sure that they are considered permanent. And I would also like to add that in all the violations that you could possibly have, you really don't want your product seized for tracking. I mean, it's different for, performance violations where you have to do a test, but there's sometimes companies have done all the right tests, have spent money on third-party testing laboratories to test their products, and then they still don't have the tracking information on their product. So it's very important that you have that. And one last thing I'll mention, if for any reason that the tracking information is not available, or you're not able to put all of the information on the product, we do sometimes consider that if you have a tracking system where you can track your product, like you can tell us, well, I can track my product. This is my first batch, my only batch, and I can track it because I only made this product in 2020, and that's the only product I have. So if you can provide information to us that can prove that this is the only product you have, that could be something that we would consider. And the other thing is, some products can have a special marking, like how Nike has that swoosh mark. Some companies can have a special identifying mark that they know that identifying marker can help them identify the product. But they have to have that information in a system at their company where they can tell us that this mark identifies all the other required information, like the manufacturer name, the date, and all the required information that we discussed earlier. So that's the only thing I would add, if that helps.
Thank you.
Great. No, that really, really helps. I think that's a really good example using Nike there. That's probably a brand that everyone can kind of refer back to as well. So thank you so much, Steve, Carolyn, and Carlos, for joining us today from different parts of the world. Everyone looks fantastic. I'll say that again. So what we'll do now is we might conclude the webinar. For those that are watching us live streaming on Facebook and LinkedIn, if you do want to watch a playback of this recording or this webinar, we will be sending a recording through to you if you've registered through our website for this webinar. We will also be posting a recorded version of this webinar on our YouTube channel, as well as on our HQTS website. For those that's also registered, again, I will be sending out an email with contact information for you to get in touch with Carolyn and Steve if you do have any questions related to CPSIA or CPSC in particular. They might be able to help you. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us again, and we look forward to meeting with everyone again. Yeah. Merry Christmas. We don't catch you by then, though.
Thank you. Happy
Thank
holidays.
you. You too. Bye.
You guys.